All good? Okay, I think we're good to start. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending this morning's session. I'm Edward Dennison. I'm a professor here at the Bartlett School of Architecture and a very proud member of MOHA, the initiative that's brought this event together. So I just wanted to say a few words by way of introduction to everyone that's come here this morning. I hope you'll feel welcome here, not just this morning, but throughout the whole day. Drew, thank you so much. Thank you. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for coming to this important research networking event. It's organized under the auspices of MOHA, which for some of you might be a new acronym, but I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. It's set to be quite an extraordinary day of discussion and debate and deliberation, but above all, it has been planned to be enjoyable. So I really emphasize that for all of you, I want you to feel welcome, feel at home. There's plenty of food at the back. There'll be lunch provided, some food this evening along with music, and an amazing array of different attendants throughout the day. So please feel free, please feel welcome and at home at the Bartlett School of Architecture today. We're very honored to be hosting so many guests, including all of you present here at this first round table session. Collectively, you're all current or future leaders in your respective creative fields and have been approached because your research-led practice embodies the key themes that have emerged from the MOHA initiative over the past 3 years. For those of you who are not so familiar with the global collaborative that is MOHA, MOHA, which stands for Modern Heritage of Africa, Modern Heritage in the Anthropocene, was founded in early 2020 by a multidisciplinary group of academics and practitioners from around the world concerned principally with the ways in which wide-ranging creative practices, including historiography, art, and heritage, are bound by or defined by Western-centric values, and they seek to address their far-reaching and often structurally inequitable consequences, especially in the light of the planetary crises we now face. By making explicit reference to modern heritage and the Anthropocene, MOHA therefore draws a connection between the inequities of the past and the unsustainability of our present and future. Modern heritage, therefore, loosely defined in all its forms, is a focus because it represents the paradox of being of modernity and yet threatened by its consequences. And that's a really key theme for us. It's being of modernity and threatened by its consequences. Key outputs of MOHA include nearly a dozen global workshops and symposia, 2 international conferences, including one here at the Bartlett School of Architecture last October, 2 special MOHA editions of Curator, the Museum Journal in 2022, and then there will be one coming out in 2023 in October, based on last year's conference. A specially designed and co-funded website, which has just gone live today, so please Google moha.org and you'll see our new website, moha.org. Also today's AHRC-funded research networking event, and also the creation and publication of the Cape Town document on modern heritage. The Cape Town document on modern heritage is an important and visionary policy proposal that advocates an equitable and sustainable approach to the theory and practice of modern heritage in a planetary age, calling for a reframing of how modern heritage is defined, identified, conceived, valorized, protected, and safeguarded. By acknowledging the role of inequitable and unsustainable practices that gave rise to and often characterize modernity, such as slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and fossil fuel extraction and dependence, the Cape Town document on modern heritage is a decentering and restitutive framework aimed at sustaining, promoting, and reimagining modern heritage for future generations in a more cohesive, inclusive, and equitable way. The theme of today's research networking event is referentiality. As MOHA seeks to challenge the impact of Western values, experiences and practices, it is important to therefore ask how we, as academics and practitioners, find different ways of working that are not bound by, defined by, or referential to structures of power that are inequitable, unjust, or unsustainable. This event today, therefore, joins the Cape Town document on modern heritage and other MOHA initiatives in drawing attention to and challenging the structural inequities in heritage practices and their associated disciplines, including art, architecture, and curation. It forms one of 4 regional workshops planned to develop and strengthen research networks globally. The other 3 workshops have been organized by the Swahili Pot Heritage Hub in Mombasa, in Kenya, and they'll be joining us this morning. University of Cape Town in South Africa, and the Direction du Patrimoine Culturel du Sénégal in West Africa. I'm delighted that representatives from these groups will be joining us online and in person here this morning. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all and to thank them, and especially, although I think he's just disappeared, Maxwell Mutanda, who has worked so hard to make this event happen today, to invite all of the participants this afternoon and to make everyone as comfortable as I hope you are, despite the heat, which he couldn't do a great deal about, though most of these fans are from his home, so he's doing all he can. So on behalf of MOHA, welcome, enjoy yourselves, make yourselves at home at the Bartlett. Before I hand over to my colleague Evgenia Gubkina to introduce the participants for this morning, I just wanted to just introduce the chairs. It's going to be a fairly informal event. We want it to be a conversation, a discussion. But there will be 5 sort of chairs or conveners this morning, myself included, Evgenia Gubkina, Emily Mann, Alisa Barry, and Shahid Vauda. They'll all introduce themselves in a second. I have just asked each of them just to say what referentiality means to them, just to get that conversation going before the participants speak very briefly about what referentiality means to them as well. So for myself, I would just say that in the conversations we've had around MOHA over the last 3 years, my experience, I've worked in Eritrea for nearly 25 years, and I was involved in the World Heritage nomination, UNESCO nomination for Asmara, the capital city, which is the only modern heritage site in Africa on the World Heritage list. And for me, referentiality speaks to that question because when writing that nomination, UNESCO were interested, I believe, primarily in how it represents an Italian colonial city, less interested in what that meant for Eritreans and the Eritrean experience in the creation of that modern heritage site. So the inability for us to be able to speak to UNESCO and how to be unreferential to the Italian colonial or less referential mattered a great deal for our nomination. I won't go into any detail further than to say that. Evgenia, would you like to say a little bit about yourself? We have to speak through microphones this morning because it's being recorded. So maybe we can hand a couple around the room. Everything is being recorded and this will be put on the MOHA website in due course. So please bear that in mind. If you don't want your voice to be heard, please decline that offer rather than us having to edit the recording at the end of or after the end of today. Does that work?
No,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward, for the presentation. It's not so.
There's a skill that one acquires at the Bartlett of just holding it.
Yeah, it's a very complicated skill actually. So my name is Zhenya Gubkina. Zhenya, it's a short version of my name. And I'm an architect, architectural historian, and I'm a director of Ukrainian NGO Urban Forum Center. I wrote 3 books. The first one was about Slobodich. Slobodich is the city that was built after Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster in 1986. Another one, it's about modernism, brutalism, and postmodernism in Soviet Ukraine. And another one was maybe more connected, actually, with referentiality, what Edward talked about. It was about Bauhaus Zaporizhia, and actually about connections between Bauhaus School of Architecture and Soviet modernism of interwar period. But another maybe even more dramatic things connected with this is, of course, all this field of Soviet heritage and Soviet legacy in general. Because usually when we talked about even UNESCO nominations or any other history of architecture, theory of architecture, or even art, we usually connect it with all these connotations with Moscow and understanding of Soviet heritage or Russian avant-garde, for example, through Russia, Moscow, and Moscow as the center of a big, some quasi-empire. And it was all the time very difficult. You should argue all the time that actually Soviet Union is not just republic. It was a lot of different other republics that had their sovereignty, that they had autonomy and own history. So all the time it was some very difficult debates, but definitely when the full-scale invasion in 2022 started, all these decolonial alliances really helped us to communicate with the world what it is and how to fight for truth. And we are very happy that already MoMA and MET, they changed the titles and prescriptions of art, explaining actually what was the structure of Russian Empire, and for example that Repin not a painter at all. So thank you.
Hi. Oh, yeah, that does. Does that work? Yeah, it does. So not used to hearing myself so loud. Hi, everyone. So I'm Emily Mann. I'm an associate professor here at the Bartlett, relatively new. I joined here from the Courtauld Institute of Art, where I taught and was also a student. I'm a member of the Survey of London research team at Bartlett. And I could talk more about the survey and referentiality in terms of the kinds of history we're writing. It's surveys, but my own research is actually been very much on English colonization and the role of architecture in the process of building England's colonies from the very early 1600s onwards. And so referentiality for me means real risk in doing that history, a history that has thinking about the role of architecture in the processes of exploitation and extraction, relying on materials in the kind of imperial center for thinking about that history. And thinking about how we excavate that history, to instruct in order to learn from it, sorry about the mic issues. But also, so thinking about what our archive is for that history, and also thinking about how we write that history, architectural history being so dominated by a canon and a particular idea of what architecture even is. Now, my work has also been at a lot of maps, and I've been involved in a conference last week about the art and architecture of mapping, and that very much exposed also the problems of thinking about what a map is and what building is, and how all of those ideas have been dominated by Western Eurocentric ideas in very much kind of constructed in the process of colonization. So referentiality for me very much the risks involved in that work, in thinking about its impacts on the present and the future of the places that we're studying. Okay, thank you, and apologies again.
A little distance from your mouth, not too close. It comes too close, not too far, but not
Okay,
too close.
like this?
Not too...
Okay.
Sorry.
It's not working. Okay. My name is Alisa Barry, an urbanist specialized in African. It's not working well. Like this? Okay. I'm an architect and urbanist working in an independent consultant on African cultural heritage. So I'm working with various institutions, national or international, to help them develop promote, preserve, maybe it's better. Thank you. Okay, it's working. Um, so, what I can say maybe about referentiality. By the way, I'm from Senegal. Sorry, I forgot to say. Part Africa. And what I can say about referentiality in my work is that I work in the field of heritage, but I'm looking at heritage from Africa to Africa, but also from Africa to the world. And to me, it's really the main goal as referentiality in the second thing is that to me and in my page is not only about buildings. I'm an architect, also heritage in arts and creative industries in general. I'm the founder, for example, of a platform called Africa, of contemporary. And then the third thing is that to me, African heritage is not only about pre-colonial or colonial era. It's also about so that's what. It, thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
But not here this morning. Got Oban and not around here. I'm a university town researcher at the University of Witwatersrand. I'm the recent part chair and critical. So I guess one of the people that formed MOHA and have been through the many conferences and work. I want to make a couple of points, 3 or 4. One, which I think Alicia has already made, is that heritage is not about pre-colonial Africa. It's really about whatever happened in the past. Africa's modernity or modernities are much longer than the way we understand modernity. In reference to Southern Africa and the East Coast, we have a whole Indian Ocean to deal with, and it stretches from really various points of the hinterland from the East Coast of Africa all the way. So I'm making a much longer argument for modernity. Modernity that we understand introduced through the Enlightenment, through colonialism into Africa. Quite an important point, because a lot of what we reference or tick off as the indices for modernity originated in other parts of the world, and we're aware of that. The second point that I want to make is that about the past looking into the future. As we all know, South Africa was one of the last colonies to get, I won't say independence, because of course South Africa was independent of the Commonwealth way back in 10. Important from 1910 up to now, 40 years of lecturing in it's also about how do we understand these and where in its heritage make the sign. So for us in Southern Africa and South Africa in particular, the 80s and 90s were those sign points. Just to the north of us was Zimbabwe, and we were the next. to have what was important about this was there were two aspects. One was, of course, there was going to be a change in the way we understood what we wanted to represent heritage. But the peculiar thing about it was that we adopted all the British colonial legislation around heritage. Get away from that. That was in that the recent workshop held at the Eco Museum. CEO is right here. My wife. If as the workshop goes on, I'll have a presentation on the points. How do we understand the frame and whether that heritage still back to an understanding of how heritage, or what frameworks need to change. And that change is quite important, the way we understand our modernity. Oh, I want to mention one last, because you raised it in the context of the Soviet Union. And one particular aspect of Soviet influence was, of course, the AN and the South African Communist. One of the aspects that we took on from that in the post-1994 period is what I call the productionist thesis, which both contribute to the Anthropocene crisis that we have now. And so that's something now that we need to grapple with. How do we understand, or how do we unravel that particular problem? Thank you.
Okay, so now I will try to. You think that there it would be better, for example? Yeah. Maybe we all should talk from this position. Yeah. So I will practice a bit in mispronunciation of all your names, and I'm sorry in advance because, you know, it's usually very tricky. So I will now present each of you, and then so you think that I should present all of them, and then they all will present in order or separately? Okay. Yeah. Just to know who is. So Nick Beach. Nick Beach is associate professor at the School of Social Policy, University of Birmingham, leading a 3-year research project. Stuart holds archive readings, conjectures, right? Great. Jana Bennett. Hi, Jana. Co-founder of One-to-One Agency of Engagement, is a unit tutor at the Bartlett School of Architecture and a doctoral candidate. His research focuses on inclusive design, spatial justice, critical positionality, and urban planning in South African cities. Alistair Cartwright. Alistair is a postdoctoral student at the University of Liverpool. His current research looks at reconstruction after cyclones. His work uses social history methods to investigate the contested afterlives of built spaces from post-war London to Mauritius during decolonization. Jumana Emile Boot. Did I pronounce it correct? Thank you. Jumana is studying a PhD at Slade School of Fine Arts at UCL. Her practice-led doctoral research seeks to reactivate folkloric practice through collaborative and creative workshop methodologies, through storytelling, performances, drawing, and crafts, using such tools to rewrite the tales as a gesture of reclaim and reunion with water. And in order to situate our connectedness to story heritage once more. Shahid Salem Shahid is an architect, author, and academic at the University of Westminster. His research and practice explores the architecture of diasporas, in particular their relationship to heritage and belonging. Salim co-curated the V&A Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2021, and his book, The British Mosque, was published in 2018 by Historic England. Kay Setkin. Am I right? Yeah. Kay is a lecturer and design tutor at the Bartlett School of Architecture and an associated researcher at the University of Kent. He is a co-founder of Betty Blue Ltd and a former editor of Interruptions. His work explores topics related to ethics, aesthetics, and subjectivity under the term of architecture of the self. Vasundhara Silamutum. I was right, yeah? Vasundhara is a London-based Indian artist drawing on vernacular architecture and art history. Her practice considers visual hierarchies, place, and authorship through playful acts of cross-cultural translation. Edefora Toye. Edefora is a PhD student at the University of Liverpool, studying the modernist architecture of Nigeria's first universities and the notions of development and identity in early independence era. Doron van Beider. Doron, right? Doron is an architect, researcher, and an academic. Working in collaboration with industry peers, he is leading researcher in practice composing design paradigms and praxis for acclaimed projects around the globe. Yeah. Thank you for your attention. So the first one, yeah. It's better to be here, really. It would be our advice, not just to move from this position.
Okay, and do I press the button? No. And I don't move, but it can be heard. Is it working? That's great. Okay, I'll try. So yeah, so I'm about to begin lead on a project at the University of Birmingham, recovering work from Stuart Hall's archive. So that consists of about 89 to 90 boxes of Stuart Hall's unpublished papers, letters, cassette tapes of lectures he gave, audio-visual cassettes, VHS tapes, and so on. I think probably most of you know who Stuart Hall is. Born in Jamaica, in Kingston in 1932, he always considered himself to be a colonial subject, not a post-colonial subject. And I think what I've been thinking about in terms of referentiality for today is the fact that there is a great tension within his archive. It registers coloniality in that archive. And much of Stuart Hall's imagination around modernity, the future and transformation are informed by and formed by colonial conditions. And we have to acknowledge that in our practice of recovering and making accessible his archive. At the same time, he posits another possibility. He makes statements about a different set of practices in relation to his own history and others' histories, which would suggest a different kind of practice and relationship to his archive. That is, that we cannot simply preserve, conserve, and make accessible his material. We must bring present concerns, present conditions, and future conditions into relation with his archive to open it up and transform it, actually. So that's what I've been thinking about, that experience of tension and necessary tension that we can't let go of between the colonial and an other space. Still enough. Great.
The slides though, how do you... this will work. Yes? No? Is it working? Is it picking up on the microphone? In the back? Okay, cool. Nice. Figured something out. Sorry, I prepared something a bit more formal. Who knows how Macs work? It's not the founder. So I'm normally the person who... Oh, the slide, please. Yeah. They what? Yeah. Brilliant. I'm normally the one that fixes the tech here in this building. Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to be sharing my understanding around referentiality through the concept of limits and opportunities, and talking through my own practice work as well as my current doctoral work. So my name is John O'Bennett. I'm an architectural researcher and spatial practitioner from South Africa. And I've been based in Johannesburg for the last 10 years, and the last more recent 4 of those here at UCL doing my PhD in architecture at the School of Architecture. I spent more than a decade working between my co-founded nonprofit entity, which was set up to address systemic spatial inequality in South African cities, which we named One-to-One Agency of Engagement, while working across the host of teaching research institutions, most influentially that of Professor Loco's Graduate School of Architecture, where she relocated design research through the unit system in South Africa and grew the school into a seminal space for critical spatial research and practice. For me, a very important reference point in my own journey in design research. This period of learning and unlearning coincided with a series of student protests that brought critical and society-wide questions and challenges to the colonial and apartheid era legacy within the fundamental aspects of our society, most notably within our educational system and our shared urban spaces across the country. Although the nature of South Africa's spatial inequality is well documented and engaged with at length, before the protest, the question for me at this stage in my career lay in reflection, if not this, then what? Such images as these are provocative in highlighting the physical barriers that still separate the people of my country, but offer little in any direction towards addressing the palimpsest of socio-spatial, economic, and political factors that continue to reinforce these patterns of segregation and inequality. Looking backwards, it's easy to see which factors led to my country's current situation. The political and historical elements are largely understood and unquestioned. But what is evident from the student protests, and it remains more difficult to work with to those of us who are currently situated in this context, lies in our interpersonal relationships to these dynamics within ourselves and the built environment that continues to reinforce such readings of us and other. Our own internal referential experiences of the city and those of us who use these spaces remains largely unchallenged and unchanged. Imagery of such areas that demonstrate this, such as informal settlements, to live there, the way in which they live and their role in the city, are contrasted to our own global references to what the city should be. As a result, built environment practitioners, themselves products of these global urban interreferential prejudices, continue to perpetuate such influences project by project. This I know because I too was carried in these beliefs at the start of my own career. While this condition is well known by many Southern practitioners and scholars, I would like to take a moment to qualify what I mean by Southern. I draw from a collection of researchers who are choosing not to reinforce a north-south binary of geographical location, but rather an understanding of periphery and a hegemonic center, or as Gautam Bhan describes as a set of moving peripheries. In order to counter the dominance of urban scholarship and normativity of city imaginary and practices being value skewed by sort of northern values or good urbanity. In regards to such values in South Africa and how we reconcile these as practitioners, excuse me, that our own references are set to such ideas of the urban have been fundamentally designed to reinforce our own otherness, when we ourselves are situated and embodied value carriers of such experiential references in our own personal and professional lives. Something's happened, yeah. There we go. That was supposed to be the previous slide. At least in my own research spheres, I found such critical acknowledgement of my own complicity and important action in navigating such referential complications, towards which employing modalities of situated practice through scholarship that supports both the questioning and proactive and constructive ideas, incredibly helpful in terms of what could be a paralyzing recognition of one's own relationship to a very complex situation. This has been largely involved thinking beyond unhelpful binary references, binary reference sets that I was born into, and thinking through action-orientated and more pluralistic ways of reading spatial practice. This involves building into my own practice ways of acknowledging my own self-referentiality within the seemingly contradictory practices of working with and for others in my own context, through iterative and constantly self-critical forms of reflective practice that my doctoral studies have held further to ground and make sense of. In regards to the nature of design and such reflective modalities, I lean on the work of Dana Cuff and Donald Shon, who speak of design not only in its positivist nature, but rather as a means of holding a reflective conversation with a situation. For me, this began through a survey of my own practices work, through the reference set of our own archival imagery that we had used for the last decade to explain and share our work in South Africa and abroad. I employed line work and satirical categorization of how such images were used to convey ideas of participatory work through a series of exercises I titled Developmental Gestures. These images highlight actions captured in documentation, such as pointing or nodding, as to what socially engaged practices convinced our funders of work being successful. Such criticality in terms of image references was meant as a way of acknowledging my own complicitness in perpetuating such savior practices, and revealed a further set of interlocational contradictions, which I termed the what. These led me to important readings on how concepts of decoloniality differ from those in decolonization, while developing a set of positional boundaries for myself as a white South African, researching my own practice from this hegemonic center. This inquiry beyond and through self led me through Professor Jane Rendell's Southwriting module, where I revisited my own experiences working against an illegal eviction by the city of Johannesburg for a group of informal settled dwellers in Alexandra Township. I took these further techniques of line drawing combined with further readings of my own practice reference sets and navigated these lines of center decentering through reflective design-orientated work. These iterative and self-critical processes led to a form of reflective animation that began to thicken the line between materiality, praction, and action, and literally animated many of these stories, these difficulties, and practices that were undertaken. This form of action and animation is seen as a southerning of the architectural drawing convention and is supported in other projects that I've been conducting with my nonprofit entity since the beginning of the program. As a tool to aid in walking these thin lines of self-referentiality, I've developed a methods handbook that serves as the means of making these processes visible to both my local and international peer network in South Africa and here in the United Kingdom. I've conducted many more revisitations of these techniques to focus on other aspects of my own contribution to the Southern urban practice discourse. These have found other mediums beyond websites and supported my fieldwork, where I've been developing a spatial phrasebook. What is important here to note, and this is my last point, is that a phrasebook is not a form of translation, but a situated interpretation that forces the user to acknowledge who they are in the context, then choose a path towards actioning through a phrase or a gesture. Lastly, these interests beyond self-referentiality have led to the establishment of the Southern Urbanist Practice Doing, not reading group, that has a global reach and a local focus, as well as a digital platform that I've established to extend these reference sets for Southern African scholars and practitioners in regard to socially engaged spatial design practice. Thank you.
Try the same thing. Yeah, I'll try. Is that okay for the mic? Yeah. Thank you for the chance to take part in this really interesting discussion and to share some ideas about current research, and I'll try and be very brief about it.
So I'm currently based at the University of Liverpool, where I'm a Levigian Early Career Fellow, and I'm doing some work about reconstruction after cyclones in Mauritius, focused on the post-war period, which is a bit of a departure from what I did previously, which was about the same period but in London. But it's kind of carried through in terms of interest in kind of grassroots spatial practices, the link between inhabitation and construction and so on. I wanted to start with an image to lead into things, and this is a postcard from 1916, and I'm not going to talk about the writing, but the images of some thatched huts near the capital of Port Louis. This is 1916, and I guess I'm interested in this as an image of modernity rather than, say, the architecture of Jane Drew and Maxwell Fry, who were active in Mauritius in the 60s. And their work is tied up with reconstruction after cyclones, like so much of the waves of modernization in that country. But in what sense is this an image of modernity? I guess, I mean, for a start, a whole series of references echo back through an image like this. We might think of Abbé Laugier's drawing of the hut as a kind of original archetype of a more modern understanding of the techniques of construction of the house, principally. But I guess I'm interested in it as an image of modernity in other ways, because I want to kind of denature this image, which would seem at first glance to be a kind of relic. It's an image of an outdated form of architecture. But in fact, 30 or 40 years later, many of these thatched huts in Mauritius still survive. And again, there's problems with me even making that statement, because I'm inferring from data from a report by George Atkinson, famous colonial architect planner, drafted into Mauritius in the early 50s. And he noted that, well, he estimated that 2/3 of all rural dwellings were still such thatched huts. And he was surprised by their reasonable standard, which is telling. And I'm going to focus on, in the rest of this little story, a major cyclone struck Mauritius in 1945. It was said to be the worst in living memory at the time. It cut the sugar crop in half. It rendered 8,000 people homeless, destroyed tens of thousands of buildings and houses. But interestingly, that cyclone didn't just sweep away all these huts. It actually, I would argue, kind of further embedded them in the colonial landscape. And to understand that, we have to go back to the history of the political ecology of that landscape. So if you look in the 1830s, still about 2/3 of Mauritius's land area was forested. By the 1870s, much of that had disappeared, and it particularly affected the central plateau, which was the main water table of Mauritius, and caused predictable effects in terms of disrupting the hydrological cycle, turning streams and rivers, quote, into mere seasonal flood channels. That's according to a white paper of 1949. So it interacted with the cyclones in an incredibly devastating, kind of spiraling way. And a result of that was that a lot of the sugar plantations were abandoned. This caused a lot of colonial anxiety. A forestry expert from British colonial India, a man of the name of Thompson, was drafted in, and he recommended buying up a lot of the land and replanting it with forests, and that was done. To the extent that 14% of Mauritius's total land area was crown forest land. And most of this was, the timber that was planted was pine and eucalyptus, fast-growing exotics, imported and transplanted. And its main purpose was to preserve the water table, to prevent soil erosion, to retain nutrients and so on, and to allow the sugar plantation economy to go on. But what's interesting is that over the subsequent decades, the late 19th century and early 20th century, it drifted into a kind of commercial forestry practice. And you have these annual reports from the earlier part of the 20th century and into the 30s, demonstrating, bragging about the output of timber. And Mauritius actually became briefly an exporter of pine, and that was particularly valuable during the Second World War. When the 1945 cyclone struck, it wiped out all of those well, a huge amount of those pine plantations, almost all of the pre-1929 plantations and much of the younger ones. And there hadn't been such a huge cyclone in a long time, so this was kind of a bit of a blow for the Colonial Forestry Service. But what they did in response was to harvest up all the wind-blown timber, all the broken timber, cut it down, and they distributed over 400,000 cut poles in this way for rebuilding purposes. And I see this as a kind of assisted self-build program, a relatively early example of. And despite this cyclone effectively rendering commercial forestry unviable, and it was, they were totally shocked by this. They had to row back on all of their well-laid plans. Nonetheless, this pine plantations didn't just cease then, but this practice of harvesting the wind-blown timber became embedded, at least for the next decade, in the colonial forestry practice. And the idea was that the timber harvested in that way from trees knocked down by cyclones could be distributed for rebuilding in a makeshift way. And so there's this kind of link, this strange link between the architecture of the so-called primitive hut and this utterly modern colonial forestry practice. And I guess it's at this point that we come up against the limits of the colonial archive. Because I've been referring to people like Thompson, a trained colonial expert, Atkinson, and the forestry knowledge there, it goes back to the kinds of things that Richard Grove has talked about in terms of the French physiocrats, their interest in forestry, which was experimented crucially in Mauritius, developed in that experimental context. But there is an absolute limit here, as well as it being possible to read the tensions in the colonial archive. Because for that archive, the hut is just a hut, right? It is singular and fixed and essential. And in a way, nothing is said of its architecture, really, if we think about how it was built, how it was inhabited, what forms of life that meshed with, what forms of resistance or accommodation that meshed with. So that's the kind of limits of referentiality that I'm interested in getting beyond. And I haven't got an answer to that yet, but those are the kinds of problems I guess I'm interested in the work I'm doing.
Hi everyone, good morning, صباح الخير. First, should I stand? I have nothing to show. Thanks everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I will just share my practice. So my practice is involved in storytelling specific to Palestine and country. And I've been looking at water divining and revisiting what water divining means through creating new tools of practice. These new tools involve collaborative work, working with community, working greatly with oral knowledge, oral history, working with imagination, and also working with a water manifesto. So it's almost like a water virtues, actually, virtues that we're trying to apply to how we practice ethically as well, both in respect not just to human kin, but also to the non-human and to water. So I've been exploring this throughout my visual art practice, but also specifically in the last 3 years of my PhD practice at the Slade. And I've had the chance to work with communities across Palestine, Israel, and we're talking about when I think of I think about what it means today, not just for past and colonialism or imperialism, but what does it mean today when and cleansing, Palestinian ethnic cleansing is still ongoing. So what does that mean to practice with imagination and with community and with water? I'm done.
Hold it. Okay, I'll try it. Thank you. Did I have slides? Just talk project which was earlier this year, April, and it was sort of Ramadan. It was a seeing various objects. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Then you close the antenna.
Yeah. Sure. So this was, it was in the museum for 7 weeks from early March till from early March until end of April, something like that. And it was during the month of Ramadan, and it was hosted by a community organization called the Ramadan Tent Project, and they had a series of events throughout the period that the pavilion was up, and the events were kind of community-based. It was a breaking of the fast events, but also a series of other publicly engaged activities that were happening in the museum and in the pavilion. And the pavilion was designed with reference to the collection, the museum collection. So each element of the pavilion represented a sort of traditionally understood elements of mosque architecture, sort of historically. And each of the pieces was designed with reference to an object or a drawing or a photograph which was in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum. So the V&A has probably one of the largest collections of what we'd call kind of Islamic architecture, probably in this country. And lots of drawings, paintings, photographs from the through the 19th century into the early 20th century by Europeans. So it was a kind of a collection of the European gaze over the Muslim world over about 150 years. And what I was doing was looking at those images and then reinterpreting them and turning that into the kind of sources for the design of the pavilion. So my kind of act was to reclaim those images and to kind of demystify them a little bit, to take away a little bit of their kind of power of representing a particular gaze over the Arab, Muslim, South Asian kind of world. It resulted in the structure, which was playful, was slightly irreverent to that history, or to that kind of documentation of that history, that kind of European documentation. And it created a space which was then used in a number of different ways. So it was used as a kind of play space, a public space where people would gather, children would play there. So the actual kind of religious meaning was also, the meaning could change of the actual pavilion. It was also used for specifically prayers by the Ramadan Tent Project. So this was a photograph of the pavilion being used as a Friday prayer space. So it became a fully functioning mosque in that period, at that point in time, as well as then become a place where people could play and take photographs and sort of interact with in completely different ways. So the kind of religious, as it were, aspect of that structure was taken away at different points in time, and it was also used for music and performance spaces. So what was really kind of interesting about the whole experience was the way in which the meaning of this object could sort of slip between being a religious space, being a performance space, being a public space. and the way in which it was situated within the museum, and in a way kind of, I mean, I felt that it was kind of protected by the museum space in order for its meaning to be sort of experimented with and tested further. So just to give you that for today. Thank you.
Okay.
I lost you.
Right. Hi. Hello? Yes? Okay. Right. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. I come from Damascus, Syria. So referentiality is quite a looming theme. My current research is on a French modernist architect, Michel Ecochard, who's kind of a modern, anti-modern figure. I thought I'll present something about my research, but I haven't really reached my final thoughts on the topic yet. So instead, I'll present three ideas, three thoughts, three propagations for thought on the theme of referentiality. This is here from my current work on Chatham Intro, which is a place of an interesting transformation that is also taking place in Medway. So the first theme, referentiality as directionality. So in the Meaning of Meaning by Odin and Richards, building on references and symbols, referencing indicates a causal relation between a referent and a thought. So to set it in motion, reference is something in the past that casts a shadow over a vision of the future. Etymologically, the word reference, going back to Latin, refer or referere, but also even in Arabic, marja'iyya, in many other languages, signifies a return, going back to some kind of a point of departure. But like in any story, the point of departure is only justified by the point of arrival, by the destination. I think what I'm trying to say is that, for instance, in architecture, modernity or a true critique of modernity, especially Eurocentric modernity, is not complete without a critique of the vision of modern life. And therefore, in a similar way, like the story of Genesis or the story of creation is tied up in the destination of salvation. Therefore, no critique of reference is complete without a critique of its destination. Here, the images to the right is Turner's impression of the train in the mid-19th century. And then on the right-hand side is a picture of people laying down the groundwork for the railroad just outside of Damascus on the biblical street Faifar or River Barda, taken by French photographer Philippe Bonfil. Second theme, referentiality as spatiality. So referentiality or reference as a navigation system. Jacques Derrida describes the Eiffel Tower as the vertical that organizes the horizontal plane. It is something that suddenly organized for the Parisians, their own city, in a similar way that a very long tree would organize the trail in a forest. So reference spatially belongs to a system of navigation relative to the navigated field. Each field or environment elects a referential system. In a forest, trees and trails. In the desert, the moon and the stars. So it depends on the terrain that we wish to navigate, that we choose a system of reference. So no critique of reference is complete without an understanding of its navigational force at a given terrain. The third theme, referentiality as proportionality. Slightly controversial. American philosopher Richard Rorty, borrowing a phrase from Oxford, says that philosophy is the conversation of mankind. Well, that's very nice, but it's not true. Certain people we're not talking that conversation. We're not privy to the conversation. We're not asked, and we're not part of it. Up until now, and still today, there are so many different groups, women, minorities, but also the young, the old, the infirm, as well as the deviant, the mad, the criminal, the foreign, the outsider, there are so many different groups that are not part of the conversation. We can ask ourselves to what degree is this event also, as diverse as it is, also exclusive? In a way, and also to learn something from the books of Foucault, this is sadly not only an innocent oversight, but actually is an operational condition for the establishment of discursive knowledge. So referentiality organizes a matrix of power with its distinct proportionality that made of the voices permitted to speak. So no critique of reference is complete without awareness of its inclusionary power. And I think the pictures speak for themselves. All right, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Is it there? Ah, I don't see it, but I can give it to you and you just can look. Send it on Thursday. Yeah. Everyone. No? No? That's good. Okay. The referentiality is the folder. Yeah, that's it. Our referentiality and that's the presentation. I'm gonna arrange with taken. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank Edward and Shahid for the opportunity to speak today. I open with a series of transport-inspired signs which reference popular nicknames for cities in India. Me personally, I'm from Chennai, which is known as the Detroit of Asia. And so to the simple sort of device of literary inversion, I started to think about how power dynamics are embedded in comparative expressions, such as Kolkata, Asia's London, which I've presented here as London, Europe's Kolkata. And as seen from a moving vehicle, the principle of perspectival skew further enunciates a distorted worldview and the power relations that are embedded there. Sorry, I jumped very quickly. A project I started down the road at the AA was the transcription of canonical architectural drawings. And more recently, I was looking at the Domino House by Le Corbusier, which is sort of the guiding principle of a column and grid structure, which I started to see in every modern building that was being built through non-pedigreed sort of architecture in urban India. So to transcribe it, I employed a festival lights fabricator to build me a light installation. And so through this process, I started to also ask myself about who the maker is, as well as the author and contributors of culture to the city. Oh, it's on a, hang on. Ooh, why is it jumping? Excuse me. Hang on. I am, yeah. Okay. So my recent body of paintings feature cropped facades in perspectival skews. And so using canvas-shaped relief panels and the exhibition wall, they draw on architecture without architects in India, as well as nods to Western hard edge abstraction and Memphis design. Jumping again. Excuse me. So let me see if I can start over. Why is it moving? Excuse me. So like the short reverse shot in cinema, it wasn't until I came across an article in the Architectural Digest and a couple of other journals with titles like Walking in Memphis, India, that I turned my gaze towards these colorful houses as canvases capable of endless personalization. I learned that the founder of the Memphis design group, Sotsas, carefully studied non-pedigreed construction in India, and a less acknowledged aspect of its history is how colorful houses in Tamil Nadu influence Sotsas. So this is something I wanted to draw on in my research. And following lockdowns, I visited the temple town of Tiruvannamalai, which is just 3 hours from Chennai, and it was also on Sotsas' trail in Tamil Nadu. And these are some of my images from that trip. So at Tiruvannamalai, I also had the opportunity to meet with painters, civil engineer turned architects, and someone pictured here on the bottom right corner who goes by the name Elevation Egambaram, and he specializes in the design of elevations and comes from a civil engineering background. And he claims he's responsible for the design of over 2,000 houses in Tiruvannamalai over 15 years, which is a portfolio an architect could only dream of. So when I showed him some of the publications featuring homes in the area, it turns out over 5 out of 7 of the images were of homes he had designed. And he had no sort of awareness of being in sort of the Western publications. So this interaction really got me thinking about where design happens and by whom. So I'll conclude by sharing closer-up images of my paintings. Most of my titles incorporate a sense of wordplay. So here, Deco cites the long-rooted history of Art Deco in India, as well as the Hindi word Dekho, which means to look up. And this piece here is Edapadi Cross, fixing a facade I saw in Edapadi, but also a Frank Stella painting called Delaware Crossing. The title here is a portmanteau of the artist reference Ellsworth Kelly and the Tamil word Kudal, meaning small cottage. And around this time, I was invited by Asian Paints India to sit on their panel of color experts to select the color of the year 2022, which is ironic because I was interested in how these top-down decisions then influence the urban fabric. And over here, a wall painting as well as CNC milled pieces recall a facade detail of a house in Kerala. It also brings to mind Constantine Brancusi's Endless Column, as well as Barnett Newman's Zips. So through the wall relief, I was asking if you could perform as a 3-axis zip, splicing into fleshy space. So I'll conclude with this work called Kenny Chippings, which alludes to the color field painter Kenneth Nolan. But equally, gravel chippings, a popular surface treatment on vernacular wall exteriors in India. Thank you. Please do follow me on Instagram at Russell Cell. Before.
Good morning. Good morning, all. I am Adefola Atoye, a PhD researcher at the University of Liverpool School of Architecture. And I'm happy to be here today, at today's event, and I'm looking forward to the discussions afterwards. I'm currently studying university architecture and nation building in Nigeria at the time of independence in West Africa. And this type of research relies heavily on historical materials held in institutional archives of former colonial powers, government bodies in Nigeria, and of the universities in focus. They hold interesting records on the top-down processes of education policies, development plans, and sponsored photographs and publications intended for the public. But these tell incomplete stories when investigating the results of lofty nation-building goals, For example, were these ambitions realized within the university community, particularly among student population at the time? Their perspectives are silent or at best underrepresented in these sources. Also, consulting archives in transnational locations has compelled me to seek out atypical sources and interdisciplinary approaches to better understand the subject, and I'll be discussing some of them today. Digitization of endangered historical materials have provided public access to records otherwise stored in Nigerian archives. For example, Gazette Africa is an online platform with open access to government gazettes in Africa dating back to the early 1900s. A more recent project is Archiving NG on the screen, a Nigerian-based team who at the start of this year began digitizing Nigerian newspapers from 1960, the year of independence. The project aims at open access use and relies on crowdfunding and public engagement through social media. Also, Nigerian groups at home and abroad, such as Nigerian Nostalgia Project, Ashiri Magazine, and Facade Nigeria, crowdsource photographs, audiovisual materials, and documents relating to Nigerian history. These materials are then collected from organizations and individuals, and they're shared on online platforms. The posts are usually accompanied by additional information and citation of material sources. Interestingly, the comment sections sometimes become rife with debate on contested histories. Beyond social media, universities are also centered in the production of Nigerian literature and cinema. Both powerful mediums give us a glimpse into how university life, including their built environment, are portrayed or imagined in the popular media. Books like Toads for Supper, The Naked Gods, Purple Hibiscus, and Half of a Yellow Sun were set in full or partially in Nigerian universities and explore the physical and social dynamics of a university community at different points in the country's history. The writers Chukwuemeka Ike and Chimamanda Adichie bring their personal experiences to the stories, as Ike was a senior administrative staff at the University of Nigeria from its inception in the 60s, while Adichie spent her childhood within the same campus. Nollywood has also produced numerous Nigerian movies set within universities, but the few movies where filming locations and campuses are integral to the plot and cinematography gives a refreshing outlook to the built environment and the way users interact with space. Although they are works of fiction, they're intended for visual consumption, the camera still employs the built environment as a significant part of the story and gives life to structures otherwise captured and curated in 2D drawings and images by architects and photographers. Looking into works of fiction and film where universities are part of the literary and visual storytelling helps to position their architecture as placemakers that amplify the networks between built structures and social life on Nigerian campuses. In conclusion, it's important to note that these approaches that capitalize public history and open access are not devoid of their own sets of limitations and possible gatekeeping. The reach of these initiatives, especially those disseminated online, is subject to the realities of the digital divide. So at the end of the day, these open access collections may be inaccessible to a portion of the target audience who are not digital literate or English literate. My presentation so far is on areas directly related to my research, and I acknowledge that I've only scratched the surface of new and existing avenues to appreciate Nigerian architectural history beyond the realms of institutions of power. Thank you.
Is the sound working right? Hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. In particular, being the last one presenting. as I was particularly fascinated to see how the differences between practice where I come from to academy that is super specific and very to the point. I've spent the last decade or so leading the research department at Ajay Associates. We have offices in New York, Accra, and in London. And I share that because the set of people that were working with us on research on multitude of projects around the globe have always helped us to change perspective, eliminate gatekeepers for different archives, from different bodies of knowledge. And I've left my position there in last April because I was rather confused. And I think that confusion is what I wanted to sort of bring to the roundtable today, in a positive or a negative way. Let's see how it develops. But particularly because under the theme of referentiality. Referentiality highlights whirlpools, confusion. For the 2023 Venice Architecture Biennale, I was asked to work on a large-scale project titled Lost Knowledge Systems. Even though the Druze people of the Gamma Highland of southern Ethiopia still and have been constructed their 7 meters beehive-shaped dwellings from locally harvested bamboo for centuries. Each of these beehive structures, by the way, lasts for over half a century. This is just one particular tiny little examples of what was represented as underneath the title Lost Knowledge System. And I bring that specific examples just to show that many of the conceptions that we have about knowledge, about usage of materials, ways of life are sort of lost to us, but very much in the hands of their original owners. Sorry. I'm going to continue with two reference quotes, both from sort of ephemeral disciplines. And the first is by someone who performs. Bear with me, I'm with my confusion, I'm trying to confuse you as well. One time in New York, I went to see an off-Broadway play with Bill Dukas and Brock Peters, two fine black actors in the cast. I thought the roles they played were insulting to black people, and I got up there on stage in the middle of the show and told them so. I stopped the play in its track to ask them why were they doing trash like that. One of them said something about needing the money, but that was no excuse. They apologized and took me home in a cab. I was half crazy with anger that night, a woman on fire. And that was how I felt most of the time as I watched my people struggle for their rightful place in America. This is, of course, by Nina Simone. While performing her anthem, Mississippi Goddam, in 1964 concert, Nina Simone quipped, "This is a show tune, but the show haven't been written for it yet." The statement typifies the singer and the pianist's expressive approach, performing agency were a structural impossibility, and Simone's body of recorded music revealed an anti-racist agenda enchanted through performance. Simone used Black American musicals, textual, and theatrical strategies, elaborating history that was transformed the location of marginality and exclusion to improvised position from which This is, of course, from Black Performance and the Outskirts of the Left, possible by Malik Gaines. The second is by someone who, let's call it, feeds. And it comes under the title, Forget Everything You Know, Creating New References Point. Starting quote, we tend to feel self-satisfied and in control when we can describe the duration of an ingredient or accurately pinpoint a particular style of cookery. It's done at a certain level of experience and taste. Impressing friends and dinner dates, I seek to strip the guest of that experience and go beyond something more original. If we are always on the hunt for accessible familiarity, we will never be open to the truly unfamiliar. I prefer for there to be some sort of sense of familiar and the unknown. And then the quote finishes with, although we must respect the growing sourcing and innate properties of ingredients, it is how we employ them that communicate fully. And this is by Jeremy Chan, who together with Ira Hassan Odukele have quite a magnificent restaurant in London. These two quotes, let's consider them from popular culture for things that are more in public domain, perhaps more or less sophisticated, as you like. But they, I think, together with the way that we conducted research in practice, just meant that everything has a place in the archive. Everything's got a sort of a narrative, a story that we learn from. So a picture from a wedding in the 70s in a particular space gives us a lot of information about what people were, how the space was designed, what was on the table, etc. So we try to find our depth of understanding and narrative for storytelling in almost everything. And that was obviously translated into written words, then three-dimensional diagrams, into architectural ideas. And then in the end of that long journey, we see a project like the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi that presents a new typology. It's just been recently opened. That present new typologies like a synagogue, a mosque, and a Catholic church and the same parameter as part of a larger, of course, extent of museums. So these places of worship are considered within that museology as well, whether we like it or not. But some implications for researchers choosing the margin. Is it still the margin? Or maybe we agree to disagree on that. But the metaphor of the margin has been very powerful in social science and humanities, understanding social inequalities, oppression, disadvantages, and power. It uses alongside other similar concepts such as borders, bridges, center-periphery, and insider-outsider relationship to democrate people in spatial terms, as well as in socio-economic, political, and cultural terms. Anthropology uses the term liminal to capture some of the elements that are lived by people in the margins. And let's propose a set of questions or shouts. Get the story right, tell the story well. And one of the characteristics of any good environment is that it's highly adaptive to its particularities. Let's perhaps go back to these environments and create a meaningful set of tools as agents of change, as there is now no natural relationship between activism and research. And I would like to question these structures of power. Well, this is a sort of impossible task, but just for the sake of it and to have some fun, of the past, but what I'm most concerned about of the present, and going back to the Venice Biennale or even to the school that we are in now, the chosen one for the future. And I'm not referring to institutional ones. I think we see shifts between centers of powers and the given new power to a new set of people, and where will that take us, or actually what will that bring from the past? Thank you.
Is it working?
No, not so.
But I have just 2 words actually. I want. And another thing that I would suggest is that very short question. I would try. So please don't be shy. Share your ideas and thoughts, and then we will move to the.
Any immediate? It's okay if we. I would just highlight the presentations we're about to have from the 3 heritage hubs around Africa. So the plan was that they would present the work they have been doing, and I'll explain why that is, and then we'll have another chance for further discussion at the end. So there's an opportunity now if anyone has any burning questions or responses to what you said this morning. No? Ah! Mike. There is tea and coffee and cakes and buns and donuts, and I'm not sure there's anything healthy there, but if you would like to help yourself, please do.
First of all, thanks for really a very rich and wide range of proposals and researchers, and it brings me to the thought that the next stage we should be having a research forum which should continue such a debate within the MOHA activity. Some questions which come about. One is, who owns heritage? And I think that when we speak about social justice and things like that, and it also relates to who owns the heritage of the past, who is owning the heritage of the future, and to who is the ownership of the present. So I think that these are 3 very important issues which we have to deal with. It means it doesn't belong to anybody, or it belongs to groups of people, but all this is, to my mind, an important point by which we can identify where we might be going. What came out for me is a referentiating of between to people, to time, and to place. In other words, looking at, there was a discussion now about Donald Schoen, who I knew and had many exchanges with him about the reflective practitioner. So it is the I and thou of Buber, and perhaps the reflections of the I, which then is referencing to people. In place that we have also beyond Africa, beyond the Indian Ocean, and the importance of a desanctifying place, which came about with Shahid's really incredible presentation in the Victorian Art Museum. For time is that we're looking at moving peripheries and the issue of decolonization and future art forms. I think these are critical points, and I'm just really in my own mind to try to begin to understand it in relationship of the modern heritage of Africa, but modern heritage within people, time and place. My last point, which is probably looks at documentation and archiving and the importance of mapping, or cultural mapping is becoming absolutely vital if we want to integrate tangible and intangibility, is also what we're actually trying to assess is interpretations. And I think that we all might agree on the values, we all might agree on the facts, but we don't all agree on the interpretations, and this is our challenge. Thank you.
And
Nassima, you might need to come over here. I'm sorry. This is a new thing. It wasn't like this before, but apologies.
Good morning. Actually, I have two specific questions about two of the presented projects, the archiving projects and also the Ramadan Pavilion. So regarding archiving projects, I think that one of the most important problems in Africa is that our culture is mostly based on oral history and oral culture, which makes it very difficult to document in an academic way. So I'm wondering if the archiving project is focused on the content that is created like in a written way and also within an academic framework, or it also tries to document the stories and histories of indigenous populations, for example, and of people who do not have access to literacy and to education in an audiovisual way, for example, because actually today many histories and also many languages are being lost just because people are dying. So I'm wondering if there is a way to commemorate them and to document them before they are lost. For Shahid, actually Shahid is my supervisor, and it's great to have an opportunity to question him now. Actually, coming myself from a Muslim background, the first time I saw the project, I was shocked, not in a negative way, because of this use of very bright and very colorful palette. Because actually Islam is mostly related to sobriety and to sometimes in some sectors to some very dark colors. So I'm wondering if the project did not trigger some debates or controversy among some Muslim communities. Thank you.
we will start from there. Let's.
Thanks for the question, Nassima. It actually was. It ended up being very popular, actually. So that was quite a surprise as well to myself in the way in which people really kind of like clicked with the project. I think one of the things about the colours is there's partly in my mind is the idea of the kind of way in which colour has been sort of minimised in kind of European art history, modern art history and so on. And so partly the use of colour is a kind of act against a kind of modernising tendency of minimising and reducing the kind of importance of colour. Partly it was about creating something which was kind of playful and therefore accessible. So kind of slightly depoliticizing, I suppose, in a way, or kind of taking it out of a kind of historical context in a way, so that it could be accessible to a kind of wide range of sort of people. So it was, and also then the meaning of it is a bit more ambiguous through the kind of turning it into a little bit more of a kind of toy-like structure. So those are the sort of reasons around which the kind of colour palette was it was a kind of colourful structure. But I think one of the points that I mentioned was the idea of the kind of museum, in a way, providing a sort of space which protected the way in which the meaning of things could be experimented with. For example, in a park or in a public space, I think it would have had a very different kind of reception, but in this kind of museum, almost like provided it some kind of legitimacy of being experimental, which was quite interesting. So, I mean, these are all observations through the process of seeing it over the weeks that it was there.
Thank you. And the question, it was to whom? To you?
So this particular project is basically trying to digitize Nigerian newspapers from the 1960s. So that's like the mission statement. So not necessarily, they're not looking at other forms of routine works or other forms of like historical material. But what you said about indigenous languages just reminds me of some kind of untapped or obscure forms or avenues that people have used to try to disseminate information on Nigerian history. And something comes to mind, like as a child, probably going out with my parents and a radio station in Yoruba language. So some of the programs talk about Nigerian history, histories of probably notable figures. So that is spoken in indigenous languages. But in these kind of forums where, well, academic forums or forums that are much more open to the public. When I say that, the use of English language is much more accessible. It's kind of still unknown, but some grassroots projects are ongoing that even I am not aware of.
I just think on that point about, firstly, you made a statement about African stories being only oral and speaking to that. I think, to me, when I hear stuff like that in my own field, which is slightly outside of maybe heritage and sort of urban studies meets architecture, we've been doing this work with UCT, and one of the things that came up was, less than 5% of literature on urban Africa is written by Africans. So the vast majority of published referential documents are written by people outside of the continent talking about that. And I think what's important in a statement is to acknowledge, first of all, a capacity to produce and support across a very diverse, 1.2 billion people, more than 54 countries, and so on and so on. To say that just because it's obviously not being taken into the system of the academic thing, which is itself is reference to one particular form of knowledge valuing, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, it doesn't value. And on top of that, I think many of these places have other forms which would, in terms of visual, in terms of written. It's not just about saying, oh, it's in the oral, we can't access it or needs to be translated. Because I think that value set then does something of unvaluing it. Because this country has its own oral history. These parts of the world also have oral histories. They just get sort of, obfuscated with all these other reference sets. So I think it's very important to not think that, or at least for me, I'm just putting it out there, that like, oh, African heritage is in the oral, therefore it's not. I think we have to also rethink about the valuing of all knowledge production, or all oral histories in the world, particularly in these centers as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Now passing the microphone to Edward.
This
You
one,
already
please.
said what you want.
People get more and more expert. I'm not. So it's time now to introduce the. Oh, actually, you have. Yeah. Okay.
So my question is.
You need to wait for my.
No? I'm louder. So.
If she can hear. So my question is for Vasundhara. Yeah, glad to know you're from Chennai. I'm from Chennai too. So I was amazed to look at the images, what you showed, all these colors, and the person's name you said Elevation Kumar. Yeah, he could easily get into one of the comedy scenes, isn't it? The way he's been given the title. So I just wanted to know, what do you think about all these colors? For me, since I've traveled quite a lot, when I go see Chennai, I've been to Tiruvannamalai, so I know, these are the colors which are kind of emerging in most of the urban areas, rather peri-urban areas, I should say. So when you said that you sat on the panel which is actually deciding on the colors, what are your thoughts about all these emergent color schemes which are actually coming in the peri-urban? It cannot be just neglected by saying that it's very gaudy or very flashy, but because I've spoken to owners where they put up these flashy colors. Why do you want such flashy colors? No, I've got many interesting responses from them. So I wanted to know, what is your understanding as an artist, architect, sort of person who sees these colors. Where does these color schemes stand within the global architectural emergence, emergence which is happening? Where do you see that?
Thank you. It's nice to know that this is here. So the colors, and there are lots of responses, and I'm sure I'd be interested to know what responses you've had. It's a combination of not wanting to look like your neighbor, so it's definitely a sense of fashion and style. There are responses that range from bright colors being cheaper because they're left on the shelf, and that context, the aspiration, I think, with sort of the middle and sort of how middle class houses would turn towards white and paler colors. So there is also socioeconomic reading of it. There's Vastu colors, which is like our version of feng shui, where color consultants who will come and do a reading before you decide if the color scheme for your house. And equally, of course, brochures like Asian paints they put up, but then influence the choices of builders and contractors and house owners. So in terms of the global connection, for me, it's been interesting to see like a Memphis revival. It's very much, having a museum presentation, but not so much, yet there are comments about how appropriate approach to investigate, and it's not as simple as simply borrowing from other cultures. So yeah, part of that research talk for me was to meet the makers and also introduce their design processes. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great, thank you for those questions. I hope there will be time for more questions at the end. We do need to get our guests from around Africa to now present their work. I should explain again, as part of the funding that came through from the AHRC, it was to have an event here and invite everybody to London. We felt as part of the agenda, the decentering agenda, it's more important to have those resources in Africa, where around Africa, in East, South and West Africa, there have been or there will be independent workshops hosted by different heritage hubs in those three locations. And it's now an opportunity to hear from two of those online, and then Shahid will present the UCT workshop himself in person, after which there'll be more time for questions. So I'm going to hand over to Alisa, who's going to introduce her colleagues from Senegal. Thank you.
Yes, so what we are planning to do in Dakar is a discussion day, which will normally be held on the 26th of July, on the theme of Dakar as an African city port, challenges and opportunities of the safeguarding of traditional and modern cultural heritages. So this is an event that will be organized by the Directorate of Cultural Heritage of Senegal, in collaboration with the University College of Dakar, as well as the Cheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar. I'm very happy to introduce my colleagues and friends Moussa Wele and François Ndiaye, who are in Dakar and here online, and who will present the initiative for us. Thank you very much, Moussa. The floor.
Thank you, Alisa. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. I'm Moussa Wale. I'm a maritime archaeologist at Cheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar, and I'm very happy to be here with my colleague François Ndiaye, the head of the division of site and monument in the cultural department, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage in Senegal, and Madame Anne Juga, who is the head of the Collège Universitaire d'Architecture of Dakar. As Alisa explained, we will quickly present our initiative here in West Africa, focused specifically in Dakar. And yes, I will share my screen quickly. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as Alisa explained, our initiative will be one day work with stakeholders here in Dakar to discuss about Dakar African city port challenge and opportunity of the safeguarding of traditional and modern cultural heritage. And I will quickly present the aims of this day work, which will held on 26th of July in the next few days. And the objective is to discuss the maritime cultural landscape and the cohabitation of modern and traditional heritage in Dakar, with a view to better safeguarding heritage on this port city. And we have to involve students about university Shanta job, about college d'architecture student also, some researchers, artists, heritage management authorities, and local communities in Dakar. And the particularity of this roundtable is really to involve local community, specifically the labor community, the fishermen community who live in Dakar, to discuss about how we can preserve modern heritage and traditional heritage in this colonial city. And the expected result of our workshop will be to share knowledge on example and cohabitation between traditional and modern heritage in Dakar, understand the challenges and strategies of reconciling the need to safeguard the cultural heritage of community with the need to promote the modern heritage in African city, improve knowledge of modern heritage in Dakar, get the opinion of stakeholder on the upcoming exhibition, which will focus on the maritime cultural landscape of the city of Dakar. As you can see, we have to do an exhibition on the next December about the maritime cultural landscape in Dakar. So this workshop will help to better analyze and involve all the stakeholders to see how we can maybe do this exhibition in December. And as I explained in the beginning, the organizer will be the Direction Département Culturel, Collège Universitaire d'Architecture of Dakar, École doctorale études sur l'homme et la société, who is in the Cheikh Anta Diop University. And I have opportunity, the pleasure to introduce my colleague François Ndiaye, who is here online with us, who can maybe briefly, on 2 minutes, present the Department of Cultural Heritage in Senegal. François will speak in French quickly, and I will summarize his communication. François, the floor is yours. François, tu peux aller.
Thank you, Moussa. You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. François, tu peux aller en français. Après, on va essayer de résumer rapidement.
No.
Okay.
I will make a brief presentation of the Doctorate of Culture and Heritage of Senegal. I'm Dr. François Ndiaye. I'm the head of the Site and Monument Historic in the Directorate of Culture. The Department of Heritage Culture is one of the departments within the Ministry of Culture and Historical Heritage, alongside the Direction des Arts, the Direction de la Cinématographie, and the Direction du Livre et de la Lecture. Created by Decree number 70093 of January 27, 1990, the cultural Heritage Department is well. Go ahead. For managing Senegalese cultural heritage, it must implement policy and a program identify, protecting, restoring, and enhancing the state well and intangible. The mission for our department is inventory and classification of historic sites and monuments, restoration and rehabilitation of historic sites, acquisition and management of the state's private and collection, creation and development of public museum, application of regulation concerning excavation and technical oversight and rehabilitation project for which is the contracting authority with the Bureau d'Architecture des Monuments Historiques. We have four, the Division of Sites and Historical Monuments, the Division of Intangible Cultural, the Horticultural Heritage, the Division of State Government. And we participate of the policy of conserving organizing the activity of the DPC is responsible for the National Heritage Day, restoring and rehabilitation of cultural heritage, digitization and coordination of World Heritage Sites. Okay, thank you. It is the presentation of our department. Musa? Hello?
Okay. François, yes. Okay, thank you, François. And yes. Allô, François?
Je vous entends pas de retour. C'est presque pas.
Okay, I think you have some issue of connection, François. But thank you very much. And I will move to Annie. I don't know if Annie is online. Annie is the head of the College of Architecture. Yes, Annie.
I'm very sorry, but I am in the boat between Dakar and the Gorée Island, and it will be difficult for me. I can say hello to everybody and speak just for few words. I am Annie Jouga. I am architect, founder of the Collège d'Architecture de Dakar since 2008, 15 years. It's a private college, a young college, and we training architects, urbanism, and we have put the network, the workshop of heritage in between the architecture and in the center of architecture and urbanism. We think that it is not possible to be architect without thinking about heritage. I'm very sorry, I can't, because I don't understand, I don't heard because there is too noisy, and I've forgotten my écouteurs. Voilà.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you very much. And as you can see, this workshop will held by three institutions here in Senegal. The direction of heritage, led by François, my colleague, and Madam Annie Juga, who is the head of College University d'Architecture. And I think Alisa, who was there with you, can tell you more about the College University d'Architecture.
Okay.
And the
Okay,
third,
thank you.
the third partner is Cheikh Anta Diop University, who is the first university in West Africa, here in Africa Occidental, and it is the university with today have more than 19,000 students with 44 nationalities. And yes, we work with this university, particularly with École Doctorale Ethos, the PhD School of Human Civilization and Society in Cheikh Anta Diop University, who also is a partner of this workshop, who is held in which was held in July, in the next few days. And why we focus it in Dakar, as you know, Dakar is the ocean gateway of West Africa, and also Dakar is a very cosmopolitan city marked by a complexity of tradition, histories, and culture. And during the past and also today, Dakar is a really geostrategic city, and can help to join South Africa, Europe, and South Africa. And Dakar is a supply port for water, food, and fuel. We can see it in the next slide for the port of Dakar. And this workshop, as I can say, will focus on the maritime cultural landscape of this city, this West African city, and can help to better analyze the traditional and modernity heritage in this part of the world. And yes, Dhaka is very rich on the maritime culture. As you know, Dhaka is built by the Lebu community, who is a fisherman community in West Africa. And also we have a lot of cultural and cultural practice linked to the water. And in this picture, I want to maybe show you some dignitaries, some chief of this fisherman community, who is the detentress, the conservator of this maritime culture here in the city. And also, it is a particularity of this community is they still preserve their traditions, their culture, and their culture in with the modernity. After the fisherman community, we have the Dakar port. The Dakar port was built since 1857 by French. As you know, Dakar was occupied in the Senegal in particular. The country was colonized by the French, and the port was built since 1857. And it is a very strategic port also, who can contribute in this maritime landscape. And the other part of this landscape is an invisible heritage. As you know, link it to the port, to the community, and all the international history, maritime history. We have a rich maritime cultural heritage, underwater side specifically. And in this map of Dakar, here is you have the map of Dakar. We have several shipwreck who was sunken since 16 and 20 centuries. And here you can maybe see some pictures of this underwater cultural heritage, who is also contribute to better have knowledge about the maritime cultural landscape. We cannot speak about the heritage of Dhaka without the audiences, the architectural heritage. And Alisa, who also can maybe speak a lot of with about this heritage in Dhaka. And this heritage is really linked also to the maritime landscape, because as you know, we have several kind of architectural heritage, pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial heritage, who really link it to the modernity in Dhaka. And here you have some pictures of some architectural heritage in Dhaka, colonial, as I can say, and pre-colonial, and also some architecture who can link it with a local community. So the particularity in Dhaka, as you can see, is we have a complexity of heritage, traditional and modernity heritage, and it is very important today to analyze, to discuss to how this two kind of heritage can cohabit in this modern city. So to conclude, it is these four kind of heritage that will help us to have a discussion in July, to know the maritime cultural landscape of Dhaka and how we can analyze this contribution between tradition and modernity to better safeguard our heritage. And yes, it is a really quick presentation, and I see yes, Alisa can better comment, and we are also available if you have some question. Thank you very much.
Afternoon, me again. So the Moha Cape Town workshop took place in April with the in association with the Ezekiel Museums of South Africa, and I'll explain why, or very rapidly just now. I also want to say I've just been told that because we've got to rearrange things, I'm going to try and go through this very rapidly. If people want to take up any of the issues that I speak about, I'm more than welcome to, or rather, you're more than welcome to do so with me after this, throughout the rest of the afternoon. So there were a couple of issues that we wanted to take up.